Hey, Decide Your Destiny crew. Thanks for joining me for another Decide Your Destiny conversation. And today I've got the lovely Vera Lee in the hot seat. Vera Lee is an author, artist, podcaster, speaker, and movement maker. Vera Lee, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit more? I'll throw the
Y-
baton over to you.
Yes, thank you, Carl. I am so excited to be here with you and all of your viewers. My name is Vera Lee. I live in a little rural town in southern New South Wales in Australia. And I've done an awful lot through my life. Most significantly in recent times is started the Why Me movement and the Why Me podcast. And I have had many careers actually throughout my life. And again, recently stepped into more of the one on one coaching scene and basically mentoring people through their adversity. A lot of people are calling me the adversity queen because I've been through an awful lot in my life. And so I now use that to be able to create the space for people to work through their own adversity. And I know an awful lot about reclaiming your identity and really getting to know who you are at the core of yourself. And I help people with that as well.
Wow. Very, very integral work that you're doing, in our communities and in the greater world. And, now that we're very much online, you can, I guess, do that with people all around the world. I'm guessing that's what you do. You've got people all around the world that you help mentor and coach.
I do, yes. And that's the beauty of, well, COVID, to be honest. And I know that a lot of people have struggled through COVID. For me, I saw the opportunity to be proactive and rather than being stuck at home, because I was actually put on lockdown for 9 months with my son. We were unable to leave the house because of certain medical conditions I have. And so on forced lockdown for that amount of time. I knew I needed to put in steps to look after ourselves, to look after our mental health, and to
Mhm.
stay connected. And so many of my friends lived on the Victorian side of the border. And so when the borders shut,
Yeah.
even more so, we couldn't get across the borders, we couldn't visit each other, even with the masks and following all the rules. And so for me, it was a natural way to reach out to people on Facebook, on social media, on Zoom,
Yes.
and I have made some amazing connections. And I finally got the opportunity to start the movement during COVID because I was on lockdown. I had an extra 3 to 4 hours every day that I was usually out doing my sport or going to gym or shopping or all the things that you usually fill your afternoons with after work. And
Yes.
suddenly I had this time. And so I made use of the time and I thought, what better opportunity for me now than to start the movement I've wanted to for the last 15 years and to start really going global, stepping out into the public space myself because I had a few things going on that I hadn't actually done that to that point in time. And we'll get into that a little bit more in my story.
Yes.
So in April this year, I decided, you know what, now's the time to step out online and be in the public space, start the movement, start connecting with people all across the globe through Zoom, through these easily accessible platforms, and start impacting more and more lives with my message, with my story, and with bringing other people's stories to a bigger platform.
Beautiful, beautiful. And so, in that story there, or your, your last, I guess, 12-month period, it's been isolation, to actually grow and get out of your comfort zone in a whole different way,
Yeah.
and really get out of your, if funnily enough, go into the shell to get out of the shell in a way, bring
Yeah.
about that movement, bring about all that, the connection, like you said, you've got Facebook, you've got all these mediums where you really can connect to the people who need your resources, need your help, and who are interested in collaborating with you and also have amazing stories. And you can just
Yeah.
raise your own vibration, like raise your own community, which is, I mean, I've listened to a few of your episodes and some of those stories just like they impact you, they really make you think and really make you consider and they hit you in an emotional way. I definitely noticed one thing with what you do is definitely this artistic side to it,
Yes.
we're covering all things, visual, auditory. You have a lot of, and storytelling. You have a lot of artistic influence. Whereabouts did that sort of derive from? Were you always into the arts?
It's a great question because I always saw myself as an artist through school. And I was also a tennis player back then. And what I did was I traveled around Australia playing tennis as a junior. I actually had a ranking and I played in the Australian Open Juniors and all
Wow.
sorts of big events.
Well done.
And yeah, it was fantastic, especially considering that I was born with disabilities and some
Yeah.
of those hadn't actually been diagnosed at that time. And so we knew that I was actually quite limited with how I could play the game. And although I was an athlete at an elite level, I
Yeah.
wasn't able to get the, I suppose, the energy to be able to keep playing long rallies like everybody else could. And so we had to design this whole different way of my approach to the game and my strategy, which ended up being a serve and volley game. And so I had these dreams that I was going to be the first champion tennis player and artist in the world. And because
Beautiful.
all the tennis champions I knew, I didn't see any of them doing any artwork, and I loved my artwork. However, as life became more busy and I got into my career and I got into a relationship with my then husband, it became very violent very quickly. And so, coming out of that relationship, I had suffered a lot of domestic violence. Gone through a lot of sexual assault.
Mm.
Through that process of going through sexual assault, something happens to who you are, something happens to your view of your identity, and something happens in the way of being suffocated by that situation, by that person. And so to really break free from that takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of self work and a lot of pain, to be honest, because going through these experiences is one thing, being able to heal from them is another. And I knew that even though I'd taken the steps to separate us from that environment, at that point I had my son who was about 6 months old. I'd never intended on being a single parent. I was more busy than ever because I was now trying to fend for us on our own, on top of going through statements with the police for the assaults, on top of suddenly having to be the only person earning money in the
Mm.
relationship and having a young child, learning how to be a mother for the first time, also being on the run from him. So we went through a long process of the courts and getting restraining orders and things. And so I moved house like once every year for about 7 years
Cool.
until I moved to the country. And so to I am getting to the question, but to
No, I appreciate your story.
yeah, so to understand where I fully embraced the creative energy that I've always had and had been suppressed for quite some time was that I found myself a domestic violence support group. And I knew that I couldn't go through this healing on my own. I'd already started seeing a psychologist, but I knew that I needed people who'd been through what I'd been through. And although their circumstances weren't exactly the same as mine, there is a very common element for women in particular who've gone through domestic violence relationship and been sexually assaulted during that relationship, usually numerous times, quite often daily, quite often more than daily, like more than once a day. And so to be able to walk into a space with
Very
other
good.
women who have experienced that,
Yeah,
there is a level of knowing that you don't need to explain the nitty gritties, as I call it.
that's great. Yeah.
In that space, I was so thankful and lucky to have the facilitator be an art therapist. And she sat us down
Wow.
and created the space for us to colour in. And
Wow.
it started with colouring in. And I've always loved colouring in. As an artist, usually we love colouring in.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, this is awesome. I can, just pay attention to colouring in for a little bit around these people in this space that understand what I'm going through, that understand why my body, excuse me, that understand why my body feels so destroyed, to understand why my soul was feeling so destroyed,
Mm.
to understand that I had gone through a separation of myself and my identity in some of those terrible sexual assaults,
Mm.
and that I now wanted to reclaim who I was
Yeah.
again. And so, being in that space, what I observed was that I was actually quite worried, if you like, about the end result of what I was doing. And I realized that as an artist around year 9 at school, I was given the impression that to be an artist meant you had to be able to do photorealistic representations of
Mm.
what you were trying to do. And I couldn't do that. That wasn't my style. It wasn't something that I had the skills for, nor the patience or ability to want to quite do that. And what I learned through this process was that it's actually about trusting the process of art and creation rather than looking at the end result. Now, that seems really simple when I say it that way. However, it wasn't. And for me, it was really a 6 week process of learning that it was okay, whatever I did, whether it was scribble on the page, whether it was shapes that I recognized or not. And what became more important was the colors I chose, the medium I chose. We did a lot of felt work, and using felt, I didn't know that felt was even real wool. And so we used wool and we would mix it up with soap and water, and then we'd throw it and bash it and do all these things to it, which this process was an amazing process to go through as someone who'd been very abused and was wanting to really reclaim who they were. You could get out a lot of anger, just
Yes.
throwing these pieces around and pounding them and, doing all this stuff to it, and then coming out with what you thought you were going to have. And then what ended up at the end result was actually quite different because felt would move a lot through that process. And so it was forcing me in particular to let go of that end result. And I learned to embrace that so much of myself and my energy is creative in nature. And when I can harness that to work for me instead of against me, and really embrace that that's who I am at my core and let go of that end result, I became happy with the end result, which was
Mm.
really freaky to me because
Yeah.
that had never happened to me in my life before with my artwork. And so then I just practiced and I did what I wanted. And I used that process to work through the emotions. There were so many nights that I couldn't sleep, or
Mm.
I would wake up from
Of course.
terrible nightmares and
Mm.
have flashbacks. And so
Yeah.
I would literally pour myself into my work, sometimes 7 hours straight. Some of the pieces, like what you see behind me, could take up to 80 hours to create each single piece.
Yeah. Wow.
And yeah, and so it was a really interesting process. And what I did was I developed a way of using those emotions, which were ugly. I mean, I felt awful going through all of those triggers and flashbacks and remembering all the horrible things that had happened, to feel that and pour it into something. And what I ended up doing was creating this process where I started every piece of artwork as a photograph.
Mm.
And from that photograph, I would strip the color out of it. I would then strip out most of the detail from it and bring it back to its bare bones of shape, light, and shadow. And from that process, then I would digitally add in colors, patterns that were there. I would work on them, I would amplify them, I would add in all these things. And so I was creating layer upon layer. And why that was so important to me and why I didn't mind spending 80 plus hours on some of these pieces was because I was actually healing myself and I was
Mm.
looking after my own mental health. So I was going through this process of breaking down all that horrible stuff that had happened to me, all those awful memories, all those pieces of crap I didn't want to have related to me anymore. And I was stripping them out. And then I was slowly adding in all the positive, all the wonderful things, and embracing all of the gifts that I have that I hadn't been able to operate in for so long. And so it was a very, very symbolic process and a very healing process for me.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, the visual that I get is kind of the dam walls opening, the floodgates kind of opening and letting it come out. I mean,
Mm.
I definitely, I can, each person has their own story, and can't quite fathom all the, stuff that you've been through, and that's very traumatic. And well done for coming out on top and going through it. And it's so great to hear that that there were support networks. It shows you how important those support networks are,
Oh,
of
yeah.
people that have been through it, in a different way to communicate the pain, like going through art. I mean, personally for me, what I've realized is I've been writing this book at the moment, and I see how yeah, I listen to some people say, I wrote a book in this short amount of time, or I did it in this, and then I look at it, I go, wow, how? And then I'm realizing with myself is to accept that this is a process because
Yeah.
it depends what you're writing on. If I was writing on um, 10 photography tips for a newbie or things like that, it'd be very straightforward. But to write from something that's internal inside and lots of pain and challenges and overcoming your ego and different sort of things that you've had to face along your life and looking back at things with a new set of eyes and observation, it takes a lot out of you. Like I
Mm.
definitely know, like emotionally, energetically, like the energy it takes to kind of like I'm in the self editing process and going through some of those pages and reading some of that stuff. And because I was very raw and very straightforward, because I went, all right, I can tidy it up, but I just want to be as raw and real because that's what's going to help people. And with whatever you're doing, creating art, writing, storytelling, I often see that as soon as you become more, how do I say, um, more bulletin, polished, it kind of your help, what you can do in terms of helping people really diminishes. And the more you
Yeah.
become raw, the more you can help because people can actually go, wow, you're human. I can relate. I have those same fears. I have those same worries. I have those same silly things that I do,
Mm.
and I can connect with you. And now what you're saying actually means so much more.
Yeah.
So I think loving the process, or at least being aware that it's part of, it's a process and enjoying it is it's a very important mind shift, to have, especially when you're such
Yes.
a driven person like you are, with being an athlete and all the things that you've been doing. To be able to enjoy the process is, yeah, it's a very important skill to learn.
It is an important skill, and it's not one that I achieved straight away. And I think it's important to note that this took time.
Mm,
And the reason that I poured myself into my work was because I felt that I'd lost my voice.
mm,
I didn't
yes.
feel able to verbally speak the trauma that I'd gone through. I didn't feel able to say my story at that point in time. And so my visual art became the way that I told my story. And then I became able to write. So I accompanied poetry, putting down all of these things that had happened to me into poetry. And
Mm,
then I would create artwork based around that poetry.
wow.
And then once I got more comfortable doing that, then I started speaking within the group about some of my experiences. And once I essentially opened the floodgates, then it all just wanted to pour out.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of public speaking on stages as an advocate against domestic violence and sexual assault until
Great
life
work.
got in the way and I had to again provide for my son and myself. And there was an awful lot going on. And that's the other side of this too, is that just going through those experiences is tough enough. But then you become a single parent all of a sudden, and a new parent at that. Like, that's a whole new
Mm,
ball game on top of everything else.
mm,
Life very quickly became very overwhelming, and I am a very determined, passionate person, and so I throw myself wholeheartedly into everything I do. There is a downside to that, and that's
mm,
burnout.
mm,
And I was very much living within burnout during that period because I was trying to be mum and dad, sole breadwinner, manage everything, go through my healing at the same time, start a new career. We're in hiding from him. So there was a whole lot of stuff going on. And unfortunately, my health suffered and it did take time. Everything takes time.
mm,
And I fell spectacularly into a situation where at that point I was actually going very well in my career and I had my own business and I even had employees, and I got to the point where I couldn't walk 3 steps without collapsing and was in hospital more than I was out of it. And I had to step away from that business. And I
yeah.
really was forced to try and look at what I could do to save my life because I was in such a dire state. And part of that was because of the overwhelm, but the other part was because nobody had actually diagnosed two of my most significant conditions that I was born with. and yet they had not been diagnosed. And most of my issues have been put down to severe allergies and severe asthma.
Mm.
And that leads into my
Wasn't
next story of
yeah.
losing my voice for real for two years, but we'll get into that in a minute.
Yes, yes. I mean, it kind of it's a story that compiles, doesn't it?
Yeah.
With each new challenge, it's like
Mm,
and wherever your faith is, or wherever whatever God is to you, or a higher power or energy, it really takes a lot of faith in those times to be able to go, you know, like you say, why me?
mm,
What is the purpose of this?
mm.
What's the reason? I mean, your movement is why me. I guess more of what I ask is, what's the purpose? What's the outcome of this? What can I use with this? Because
Yes.
it's very challenging to your soul, doesn't it?
Oh, it absolutely does. And that's the thing. I had so many why me moments, I mean, that first just traumatic splitting me in half in so many ways, metaphorically, physically. I won't even go there in detail, but that moment, that was my first biggest why me moment in my life. Why is this happening to me? This is a man that is supposed to love me
Mm,
who's doing this to me, and as a choice,
mm,
because I'd already said no. I'd
mm,
already stopped what was happening, and everything in that moment changed for me. And a little bit like the artwork process, um, when you're getting overwhelmed, it's that layering upon layer upon layer. And if you think of, I don't know, think of standing there holding a brick and then someone keeps piling on another brick and another brick and another brick, and you're still standing here trying to hold this weight that just keeps coming on top of you. Eventually, you're going to crash. And that was what happened. And yet, in the same way, I had to apply that process in reverse. And what I found was that during my most difficult but significant moments of healing, that was when I connected to God the most. For
mm.
me, I do believe in God.
Yeah,
And I found that He was showing me all sorts of things that were going on, and particularly in dreams. And I was getting visions while I was awake of all sorts of things. And I was having these accompanying panic attacks at the same time.
ah,
And so that was a bit confusing. And for me, I did seek out assistance from local churches. I tried a few that weren't really right for me. I don't think I was right for them either. And when we did move to our rural town, a friend of mine said, I think you'd really like our church. Why don't you come along and see? And I can tell you that when I walked into that space, which was actually a school hall that they hired out each day for church,
ah,
I walked into that space and the energy from the people was incredible.
ah,
At that time, I was probably at my lowest point with my health. And so I had become super morbidly obese because of all the medications that I was on, trying to control
yeah,
what they call difficult to treat asthma, not responsive to conventional treatment. And what I said was, well, if it's not responsive to conventional treatment, there's something else going on here.
yeah,
And I had recently been diagnosed with vocal cord dysfunction, one of the most severe cases in Australia.
mm.
Just to explain what those two things mean,
Please do.
asthma is where your lungs are inflamed and you have trouble breathing air out. We always knew I'd had that. And so I would wheeze a lot. I would get out of breath quite quickly. When I was put on massive doses of prednisolone to try and dampen the way that my body was reacting to everything, which was actually because of another condition called eosinophilia,
Mm,
which they diagnosed around the same time. This drug is a systemic drug. And so like at times, I was on massive doses of this stuff just to try and keep me alive, because nothing else that they were doing was keeping me alive. And I was
wow.
hypoxic at all times. So my lungs were having trouble getting air out. But the problem was I was retaining carbon dioxide, which meant that every time I had these severe asthma attacks, if they gave me oxygen above a litre a minute, that would make me worse.
Mm,
And so when they finally diagnosed a vocal cord dysfunction, what I learned was that my airway was squashing or collapsing down to like this. So you can barely see any space there.
Yeah.
And this is what was causing me trouble in inspiration, which is breathing in. And so I already had the constriction trying to breathe out and get rid of the carbon dioxide. At the same time, I couldn't get the oxygen in because my airways were collapsing on the way in. And so I was regularly blue. I very rarely had oxygen that was in the low 90s. Usually it was in the 80s. Sometimes it was in the high 70s, which is, if you stay in that state for very long, can be brain damage sort of territory.
Yes.
And when I'd have these exacerbations, I was extremely sick. And so shortly before a very pivotal moment in my life, where I did lose my voice for 2 years, I had walked into this space in church. And so I really felt comfortable around people, and I felt that God had led me there because I hadn't even been talking about faith with this person, with this friend. And she just came out of nowhere one day and said, I think you'll really like my church.
Yeah.
And so for me, this was a perfect example of God's timing.
Yes.
And how so
Divine
often,
timing.
yes, so often things happen and we don't know it at the time, but when we look back, we see how everything's fallen into place.
Putting the dots, looking backwards, yeah, and dots together.
Absolutely, yeah. So I finally got my diagnosis for this vocal cord dysfunction and was told, okay, we know what you have now. That's really great. There's no cure. And so they were trying lots of different techniques for management.
Yes.
And they were actually working on some biological drugs, which I'm now on. But at that time, they weren't yet available.
Yeah.
And so one of the treatments that I underwent was having a Botox injection into one of my vocal cords to paralyze it. And what
Wow.
that did was it kept my airway open.
Wow.
The thing was, within 24 hours of the first treatment, I was in a coma because my airway had reacted and swollen up. And we were 4.5-hour drive away from where I had this procedure done to where we lived. And with half an hour to go, I knew I was turning the corner. Things weren't good. And my dad was driving, and I actually looked up to the sky out the side of the car, and I saw an image of my step grandfather who'd passed away a few years earlier. And as I'm looking up there at the clouds and I see this image, I'm like, I know you're trying to tell me something and I'm not sure what it is. And then I started feeling my body start shutting down. And look, I'd been through so many asthma attacks and things that I knew the drill, I knew what to do, but I knew this time something was different. My body was actually starting to shut down throughout the rest of that drive before we could get to the hospital. And by the time I got to the hospital, they were doing everything they could. A decision was made that the only way to keep me going was to put me in an induced coma, which was very dangerous for somebody in my state and particularly of my size, and to fly me down to St. Vinny's in Melbourne in the ICU there because none of the regional hospitals would have had the technology and staff available to deal with someone like me in that condition. And so I woke up a few days later that nobody expected would happen.
Yeah.
And as a creative person who was certainly right in the middle of embracing her creativity and intuitive creativity, I explained to people that when I left that hospital, the blue of the sky had never looked so deep and never been so calming before. The green of the leaves had never looked so green, and the warmth of the sun had never been so comforting, and nothing had changed in the world except from my perspective.
Yeah. Wow. That is so incredibly powerful.
It's the last time I asked why me, I can tell you.
Yeah.
And that was where the Why Me movement was born. However, life, I was trying to just survive. I was still trying to get through and find treatment. I was still trying to manage. I was trying to heal. I was trying to heal my mind. I was trying to heal my heart still, and I was trying to heal my body. And so there was still an awful lot going on. And I was still trying to look after my child, who was a wonderful, amazing, growing young man.
Yeah.
who's recently turned 18. So, and this
Wow.
is like 9 years ago. So
Happy birthday.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, Christmas Day actually.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
Christmas baby.
so yeah, he was. So yeah, there was an awful lot going on, and as much as I kept talking to people and saying, look, we need these things in hospitals and we need abilities for people to do these things. Podcasts weren't as big then. Most of us didn't know about them at that point in time. I was looking into making all sorts of apps and things, but all of those initiatives needed money, and I didn't have money. I was a single parent who basically had to step away from her business and suddenly was living on the pension. And it's like, oh, well, I can't do any of this amazing stuff that's in my head
All these
because I
passions
can't
and
fund it.
ideas.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And things that I knew would help people because
Yes.
I knew this because I was in that situation and
Exactly.
I knew what would have helped in that situation.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, when COVID happened and I was finally in a position financially and everything to fund it myself, that's what I've done. I've launched the movement, and the podcast is the natural extension of that.
Yes.
One thing I haven't yet explained is the beauty of the human voice and the beauty of me having my voice. When I came back from that coma, I went through 2 years of treatments. And during those 2 years of treatments, every time that I had my vocal cord paralyzed, I couldn't speak
Mm.
because you need to be able to move your vocal cord to create sound. And so I had no voice for 2 years. And I was
Yeah.
still going back to that church. And so many people, both from within the church and strangers who'd come from other churches, were prophesying over me that I would not just impact people over the world, but that I would speak words and life into people across the globe. Now, I
Wow.
believed this and I trusted in God and I knew that this would happen. However, my logical brain would step in and say, how's that going to happen when I don't have a voice?
Yeah.
And at this point in time, this is the only treatment anyone actually has for me to keep me alive. I had nearly died 17 times up until that point in time.
Jeez.
And so I knew that every day was a fight for me to stay here. And it was a fight I was willing to take. And yet I didn't understand how I was going to be able to manage speaking words into people across the globe.
Yeah.
Well, again, with time, there were treatments made available to treat my underlying eosinophilia, which helps to reduce inflammation in my body. I get an injection of a special biological drug once a month, and that keeps my body out of that overwhelmed state, and I can more easily do things and deal with life. And yeah, I've basically worked my way back. It's been a long road, but I've worked my way back into being healthier, happier, getting a lot of the weight off, which was a real struggle because of all the damage from the medications and everything.
Mm.
And here I am speaking words into people all across the globe. It's amazing.
That is one of the most inspirational stories I've heard. Incredible, Vera. Lee. Just yeah, taking my voice away with that story. But it's a beautiful message, and I think I can relate to. Obviously, we both have our different paths, but I can definitely relate. Being in the hospital for such a long time, and when you first come out, yeah, that sun is just so warm, just so warm. It just fills you with joy, and the sky, like it's got this deep blue. And I remember the first thing that I did, I was, I think I went from 93 kilos, and I was just, it was 2 months after I finished school. So I was into rugby and I was like solid muscle, 93 kilos, and I dropped down to 75 kilograms, so I was like skinny, frail. And I remember hugging, like just hugging everyone, just like, with this like weak sort of movements, but just hugging everyone and just, and then when I hugged everyone, like once I came out of the hospital, I hugged them again, and I kept doing it just because I was just like so, which is interesting because you tell people that you love them, you've got your family, you like you got your father, you got so many different people around you that you love, but I just feel like it's really important to show them every time you can, and I think it's just, just that little act, to someone who doesn't show a lot of love can really bring them out of the shell. And but yeah, I just wanted to hug people a lot more because I wasn't able to for that time. And so many of those privileges, you just realize how beautiful life is, like, it's perspective. Your perspective gets shifted. I think this is such a powerful message, to so many people, and the fact that you're still managing your health. So I guess the question I'd like to ask is, what does self-care mean to you? Because there's so many different levels of it. And, there's the physical levels, like you said, injecting yourself each month with that, basically new age, technology that you've come from that wasn't around when you first got ill. But then there's the mental side. There's obviously having your voice is such a huge thing, because when you want to speak your voice, and you could have it could be someone who has a strong voice, but they're in a family who goes, no, we don't want to hear your opinion. It doesn't align with the rest of the family, or you're asking too many questions. Now, the famous Socrates who asked, one too many questions, and we all know what happened to him. So I guess the question would be, what does self-care mean to you?
I think that's a very loaded question.
Yes.
Thanks,
yes,
Kyle.
Yes, I know. Put you on the spot.
Well, that's okay. I like being put on the spot. I like being made uncomfortable, because that's where the growth is. I was just operating in self-care then. I just had tears running down my face hearing you talk about those hugs, because I understand the importance of that connection. And self-care to me is allowing yourself to feel what you need to feel. It's being open to whatever is going to come by, whatever is going to consume you, and then making a choice to set boundaries for yourself and other people to make sure that you're not giving so much out that you can't take back in. And I often explain to people, it's as much a gift to receive as it is to give. So many of us are so good at giving, and I'm always been a person like that. Give, here, take. I want to help. And it took so much for me. It took being in that relationship with my ex-husband and going through everything that put me through before I understood the importance of receiving, and sometimes allowing to receive love first before I could give it, because after that relationship, that was the state I was in. I needed to get from other people what I couldn't give myself until I was healed enough to be able to give it to myself. And if I go back to that moment just before I went into that coma, my other grandfather, whom I'd never met because he died 2 years before I was born, he appeared in the corner of the room and he said to me, "You're going to be okay." And that moment changed my perspective from saying, "I don't want this to happen, why me?" to saying, "I'm going to be okay." And I believed that. I trusted. I trusted the message. And when I woke from that coma, I decided it was time that I allowed myself to receive what I needed to fill my cup before I was going to be able to help others. And so for me, self-care is very much about those boundaries, and it's about understanding what your needs are, so that you can help other people. Because if your cup is empty, you have nothing to give, or you keep trying to give and you're putting yourself further and further in deficit. And this is where your mental health declines. This is where your physical health declines, your emotional health declines. And so really taking care of myself as best I could. And that was a struggle for me because my body wasn't in good shape. I mean, it was fighting so many issues. And on top of it, I had this medication that I hated taking because it made me sick. And yet, on the other hand, it was actually keeping me alive. So it was this whole contradiction of, am I actually looking after myself here by taking this medication, or am I killing myself? Because at the end of the day, the levels of that medication I was on was going to eventually kill me.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
from the disease that it was helping to
Keep at
try
bay.
and control,
Yeah.
but through all of the other comorbidities that were created from it. I mean, I got to 196.4 kilograms in weight. Now I am 169 centimeters tall.
Wow.
I don't even
Yeah.
know what BMI that is, but I can tell you that at that weight, I had 5 years to live. I was told by a surgeon many years later. He said, "Did you realize you only have 5 years to live?" And I said, "You know what? That didn't even come into my consciousness because I was trying to live every single day. Every single day was that much of a struggle for me that I was fighting to breathe every single day."
You're
And
battling in
so
the now.
I was battling in the present.
Yeah.
And so, although I was still looking to the future because that's what kept me going, and that was that hope, and that was the belief that those messages I was receiving were meant for me and that I was going to be operating that capacity, I didn't know when. And it felt like an eternity while I was going through that.
Yeah.
And yet, having that belief and that hope and having the presence of mind to look after myself in any way that I possibly could. Every couple more steps that I could do one day, more than the one before, was going to help me. Every little change was going to help me. Every better choice with food, which I've always eaten healthy, but every time I could cut back a little bit of the quantity, because that was the other thing with the medication that I was on, which is cortisone. I was on these levels that my hormones were so out of whack. My appetite was insatiable. I couldn't ever feel not hungry. And so, even eating good food, I was eating way too much. And so, it was a matter of just every little thing that I could manage along the way in the grand scheme of things, one brick at a time.
Yes.
I was taking
Those
them
little
off.
successes. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah,
And
they
that's
mean a
what
lot.
keeps you going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They build it and focusing on each one of those successes, not neglecting the power of each one of those successes.
Yeah.
Realizing that this is, if I don't take step one, then I'm not going to be able to take step two. So step one, bloody hell, that was an important step. And
Yeah.
step two, that was a bloody important step too. I think, and another point you raised there, when you saw your grandfather in the corner of the room, and he told you everything's going to be all right. And that whole giving and receiving, we can't give and receive if we are in that if we're in that anxiety frame of mind, and
Yeah.
it's so easy when you're not in the mindset or overwhelmed to say, try not to be overwhelmed. But it's really hard to receive and give in that mindset. And it's really easy to receive and give when you come to terms with your condition, with all the information that the doctors, you got 5 years, you got this many years, you got this condition, you got that thing, you come to terms with everything. You come to terms with all your insecurities, come to terms with social pressures, you come to terms with everything, and you have that strong faith with God. And for the listeners, whatever your strong faith is, how you have that strong defining faith that pulls you away from a material, physical realm that's going to be easily punctured. That's when you can really naturally go along and give and receive and give and receive. And oftentimes I look at things that happen, to so many people, and it is interesting that people that have really tested a lot tend to be people that really want to give back a lot, and for me, I wonder, is there some hand at play? Is there someone kind of going, look, you were destined for this destiny. You're kind of going down this way. I had to kind of put you in line, and yeah, I know I gave you a few scratches and scars along the way, but I had to get you back on path. I think that's a beautiful thought, to have, and whether it's true, whether it's not, whether I'm going to have some sort of university article tell me it's true or not, doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's what your beliefs are, because those beliefs, you can go out into the world and create so much positivity with those beliefs.
You absolutely can. And it's interesting. Somebody wrote something on their Facebook wall the other day, and I understood it because it's the whole concept of the Why Me movement. And instead of asking that question in those moments, why me? Why is this happening to me? It's about declaring, this is why me. It's about embracing your skill set, embracing your story, and embracing your wounds that you turn into scars. So the
Yeah.
longer you keep them as wounds, the more they hurt. Whereas I wear mine as scars that I'm proud of, and I know I would never be the person I am today without every one of those
Mm.
extremely difficult experiences.
Mm.
And when you get to a point where you do understand the overall picture, and again, this comes back to timing, right?
Yes.
Divine time is different to our concept of time.
Yes.
And I look back now, I'm 46 years of age.
Yeah.
Most of this happened in my mid 30s.
Yeah.
And so I've still been healing through this process.
Of course.
When I got to 45, there was a huge shift in who I was as a person because I made a conscious decision to step into exactly who I was and who I'd been working towards and who I wanted to be. And this was the first time in my life that who I wanted to be was matching up with who I
Yeah.
was,
Yeah.
and taking away all of those brick walls and taking away all the expectations and taking away all of the assumptions that other people were putting on me. And instead, knowing that I'd done all that hard work, it was a beautiful realization to come to. And that's when I fully stepped into what I believe is my destiny and purpose. And I have thought that I've had understood my purpose at so many different times in my life, right back from, I remember the first time when I was 16. I remember a conversation I had with some parents of a girl that I was coaching. And I was so excited at that time. So I think I found my purpose. I'm going to be a teacher. And I did my physical education and Bachelor of Applied Science degree at uni. And I went into that field and it wasn't for me.
Mm.
And that was the shock. And then
Yeah.
all these different times that, I think this is my purpose,
Yes. Yes.
you know,
Yeah.
and
I
then,
know the feeling.
not quite.
Yeah. 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 Keep going.
So,
Keep
yeah,
going.
keep
Yeah.
going, keep
Yeah.
going. And it's all of these experiences that are uniquely me because they're my experiences. When we put them all together, nobody has walked the same path that I have.
Mm.
And again, I'm going to come back to the movement and come back to the podcast. It is all of those experiences, and it is the way that I have embraced who I am, all of my creative energy, all of my intuitive energy, all of my belief, my ability to inspire others because I learned how to inspire myself to stay on this planet. That's the hardest thing you'll ever do in your
Mm.
life
Mm.
when you're faced with that choice
Mm.
to choose life when everything that's happening physically in your body is not choosing life.
Mm.
So
Mm.
when you've been able to inspire yourself, inspiring others is almost second nature. And so
Yeah.
being able to use all of the empathy that I have around the understanding of all those different experiences, that allows me now to hold the space for people. And I'll go back to that, walking into that space of women, there was that level of knowing. So I sort of feel like now I've really stepped into that level of knowing on so many different levels because of all of the whole gamut of experiences that I've had. It allows me to relate to so many more people on so many levels. And that's what we're discovering through the podcast and the movement and all of the amazing connections we're making, like yourself. I mean, we wouldn't have connected if it hadn't have been for the podcast. And
Yes.
and
Exactly.
these are the chance meetings that I love. I mean, I cherish our friendship. And
Me too.
one of the first things that I did was ask you about your photography because I understand the
Mm.
importance of that creative energy and how that works for you as well.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's the communication, but I think what is amazing about people that have and everyone goes through, everyone's going to go through it at some point. You know, whether it's being embarrassed or whatever it is, but when you're really brought to your knees, and you're really, struggling against the, gravity of pressure and smell, and you're really asking those questions, where's the next step forward? Like, I can't see it. You've got to have faith, like seeing your grandfather. When you come to those points and you're brought to your knees and you're really brought to the base of your soul, and you come through that, I feel like you communicate at a different level. It's not necessarily words. It's this heart communication. Like you said, when you're inspiring people, you will talk about things that are challenging, and someone's challenging a topic and different sort of things, and you'll just chat to someone, and you won't realize until someone said it to you, but with your observation, you've inspired them, or because you're talking in a different thing. You're not talking in the caught up of this guy versus that guy and this one, that one, and the who, keeping names and keeping score. You're looking at it from a bigger picture, like a grander picture, and looking at the whole sort of game or the whole sort of vision, and you're able to resonate with people, with their hearts, with their souls, and communicate to that. And I always find, and people are going to have layers of everyone. I mean, every person, but you're going to have layers of your opinions and layers of things that you've got to get through. But when you can speak to someone's heart and soul, it kind of just dismantles everything, and you really get to that core, and then you go, wow, like, okay, what can we do with, what can I take, what can I own, what can I change in my own life that's going to instantly make me happy in the situation, because I'm caught up in the distraction of this, and I'm caught up in that and this, but what can I do? And like you said, inspiring someone, which I'm sure you do, a lot of the similar stuff that I'm talking about, is that you're giving someone else the gift of deciding their destiny. You're giving someone else the power of, wow, I understand this and this is going on, but what are you going to do right now to improve your life, improve your son's life, improve your community's lives? And that's a powerful thing, to be given that permission.
It is, and I'm glad you used that word, permission. When we share our stories, that's what we're doing without saying so. We're giving people the permission to consider their own story. And I just finished recording the intro for my season 2 of the podcast, which is a little bit different to season 1. Season 1 intro is a brief moment in time of when I went into that coma, and explaining why that was the last time I asked that question, why me? The season 2 intro is all about the power of storytelling. And the last few words I say in that intro are, I understand the power of my story. Do you understand the power of yours? And it's giving that permission that every time we share, we're giving permission unspoken to our listeners to decide, am I going to take up that offer to share my story? And when you inspire people, that's often the result that happens. They come up to me all the time and say, Vera, because you shared that, I understood that, it touched me in this way. I resonated with it. You've given me the courage to tell my story for the first time. And quite often in a lot of the podcast interviews, I've had stories being told that later on the guest has said to me, I've never told anybody that before. And here they are telling it in a public forum, which is huge. Like I totally get how massive that is. And every single time they've said to me, it's the way that you create the space. I feel so comfortable with you. There is no judgment. And I feel like you gave me permission to do that. And again, if it wasn't for all the experiences that I've been through, I wouldn't have been able to do that.
Exactly. And it's one of those things that people say to you, like I've had some people say, doesn't that upset you? Or, don't you wish things had turned out differently? Or don't, and a lot of that stuff I just find like, and I'm very polite about it, and probably over the years I've been more polite than my initial reactions, but it's kind of like, that's a dead weight question. It's happened now. That's, you're trying to take me back to to a painful place, and not intentionally, but And I've always found those questions. And like you said, getting uncomfortable allows growth. And I'm not saying that those questions shouldn't be there or I should censor them
Mm.
or I can't stand. I'm saying that I welcome them because they allow me to grow. Because then with those questions, I can really ask myself, oh shit, yeah, I guess my life would be a bit better if this didn't happen. I'd be able to play this sport. I'll be able to do it. I'll be able to go, oh, I wish, and I really love that sport. But as you go through it, then you go, wait a minute, I'm so much mature than I would have been. I
Yeah.
know where all my mates are. I know what they're up to. I know
Yeah.
where I am. And that's no judgment. It's just that I'm closer to my purpose, where I might have still been figuring things out and getting agitated and going, kind of the up and down, the feedback loop of I feel I'm getting close to my purpose, but now I'm not there. Where I think when you go through that and you have those life altering and sometimes shattering experiences, you are given the opportunity to build yourself back up and mold yourself and sculpt yourself into the form that you really were supposed to be. And with my photography, I always loved taking photographs of children and elderly people. And in the middle, kind of, I never naturally loved that sort of process. And I think talking to you now, creating the space, I think,
Yeah.
a part of that is that when you're young, you really know who you are and you do what you want to do. And I want this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to jump into that, I'm going to be bold, I'm going to be brave. You kind of lose yourself in the middle a bit. And then when you're older, you kind of find yourself. And for me,
Yeah.
my whole thing has been the earlier I can find myself, the better,
I
and
love that.
yeah. And if it took some hard things and life changing things, then I'm okay with that,
Mm.
and what do you have at the end of the day? You have I get to have conversations with people like you, and and what do you have at the end of the day? You're inspiring people all around the world, and I think like are there many greater things than that? Than people coming onto your show and saying, I went through a healing process on your show. I opened up.
Yeah.
I've changed since then. I mean, that's one of the most
Mm.
empowering things we can give as humans. And we
Yeah.
receive something
And
when we give that.
well, that's exactly right. I'm receiving inspiration watching that process
Yeah,
from
yeah,
everybody who participates in that. And that's what fills me up. And I often explain that to people. For me, we go back to that self care question. It's a balance for me because if I could, I'd spend every day, all day in these conversations, and I
yes,
can't do that
yeah, yeah,
because it is emotionally taxing on myself.
mm,
There's a lot of investment. And I'll go back to when I was starting to use my voice to tell my story. I would have a headache for days after
mm,
that because of the emotional tension that that created.
yeah,
Um, and so it is a balancing act. It's a matter of having enough of your cup filled and being able to give out what you need to give and to keep that in balance. So it's not empty and it's not overflowing all the time either.
yes.
So just finding that balance I think is really important.
It's a lifelong challenge, balance,
It
for sure,
is.
for
It
sure.
is. I'd love to share something with you if it's okay
Yes.
about photographing young children and the elderly. I wanted to do it was about 8 years ago. I wanted to do a community project. And I actually was almost in the process of getting it set up. We were going to get it funded and everything. I had a number of other artists that were going to make hats. Okay, so they were going to make these hats that people could wear. And my concept was let's go into some of the elderly homes around here
Mm,
and let's have a day where we set up some portraiture and they can choose whatever hat they want that's
yeah.
being made by these incredible artists and they can dress up and we'll take some photographs of them. What
Yes.
a beautiful thing would that to be able to do.
Yeah.
And their family could have a photo and we were going to give each of them their own photo to have of themselves.
Yeah.
In the same way as you realised just now why it is that you love photographing children and the elderly, that was what I was trying to capture
Mm,
in that initiative, in that you go into a home where there are all these people that are at the end of their life. Okay, they're
mm,
there for a reason. They're there because they need extra care. They're there because they might not have as many years as they would like
mm,
still here.
yeah,
So why not give that gift of that little bit of enjoyment, that photo forever that they have and that their family has, of them being like a child again? Because
yes,
so often that's where we need to be for the fun, and
exactly.
elderly people get that because
Yeah,
they've accepted where they are in their life. They've accepted their journey there,
yes,
regrets or no regrets. They can't change the fact that they are here now in the present moment.
mm,
That is where they're at. And so they're going to make the most of what they have left.
yeah,
And adopting that approach to life every day, no matter what your age is, it's a beautiful space if you can get there.
exactly. Yes, and it's the natural curiosity and the natural curiosity and fun and play. I mean, that's what my grandfather who raised me really he had that, and whenever the kids came over he would always be playing with them. He'd play with us, and he put masks on and run around the house and all that sort of stuff, and with the kids he'd do the same sort of thing, and he'd play so much that they'd go crying to my grandmother, and he'd get a little bit reprimanded and that sort of thing, but that sort of fun and that sort of joy, I think when you see it encapsulated in someone, it really kind of shines bright like a headlight, on the road, like that someone shouldn't be having a headlight on because they're coming onto you, like just this bright light, just of wow, that's life.
Yeah,
He is life right now. He's living.
yeah.
He's in the moment. He's in great. He's not. And he was an architect, and he was a very observant person. So he would sit back and he'd observe things, and he'd observe,
Mm,
the building. He'd observe people, and he would think. So he was a thinker, but he
yes.
wasn't ever stuck in that phase. And I think it's coming back to that curiosity and that fun, is really special. And like you said, if you can get to that place, and even getting curious about things that you might have lost interest in, or getting,
Mm,
one word that I found today. So I was listening to an inspirational video, and something about it was saying, interested, like be interested in. I was like,
mm,
isn't that so funny? Like how you can just change your attitude slightly and be a bit more interested in what you're doing, and
yeah.
suddenly you just take it on. Like whether you're reading a book, or whether you're trying to fill out a form, or whatever you're doing, when you're a little bit more interested in it, it just flows. And that's kind of like the flow or the heartbeat of life. That fun,
Mm,
that curiosity, that interest. It's like that's how to do,
yeah.
and that kind of apathy, that lethargy, that woe is me, you know, kind of is not the heartbeat of life. You
No,
know,
it's not.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
well, I love that story. I mean, I think that's a brilliant initiative, and I think
Mm,
if you take it out, if someone watches the podcast and they take it out wherever they are, and that's the thing, with this international community, people can do these sorts of things all around the world.
yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's it.
yeah,
That's it. And I was actually really annoyed when I couldn't do it because we had everything set up and then I had to go and get a full-time job.
yes, yeah,
So that
yeah,
was the only reason that didn't happen.
yeah,
And it's on the back burner with a whole heap of other amazing ideas that I have. And what I've noticed, and this is why it makes sense for me to be doing what I'm doing, if I look back at my life, if I take that helicopter view and I look back at all the things I've done, everything I've ever done has been about connection.
yeah,
Everything's always been about storytelling. And even when, I mean, I started the local photography club here when I moved up here.
yeah.
And every time I'd speak, it was always about telling stories. And I educated some of the most beautiful people I've met through that
Wow.
club about it's not just the technical side of photography. In fact, more about photography is the story that you're telling. So to start looking at
100%.
what they're producing and looking at the stories behind, some of those people are just amazing photographers now. And I
Yeah,
had a little part in that,
yeah,
and that makes, again, it makes me feel good to know that I've inspired people to embrace that, that experience and journey of being in the present moment and knowing that what we do, we always have a choice about how we respond. to whatever's going around us. We have a choice to be intentional. We have a choice to be interested,
Mm.
and to learn new things. And for someone who nearly wasn't here 17 times, I can tell you I am interested in just about anything these days because I wake up every day thanking God that I'm here and thanking Him that I not only was able to understand hope when there seemed like there was none. I had every reason to give up, I can tell you, and I didn't.
Mm.
But to believe that His timing wasn't going to match mine and to know that eventually things would line up, well, now I'm operating out of that space. And it feels amazing. And I also know I would never have got to this space had it not been for that journey and those experiences.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I've got a very powerful question that I want to finish up with that's just come to mind. With that in mind, what you just said, and I think the world that we live in today, we've got to have all the answers, and like you said, God's time, His divine time, it wasn't necessarily on your clock. You didn't have all the answers, whether it was the medical answers or your answers or, whatever answers, you didn't have all the answers. And I think we live in a world today where we want all the answers, because there's a litany of questions every single day. Is this guy good? Is he bad? Is he this? Is he that? Is that person over here? What's happening over here? What's going on in this part of the world? What are we going to use to trade, to use commerce in the future? All these questions. We've got such a litany of questions, and people really are seeking lots of answers. And I usually say questions are as important or not, if not as more important than answers.
Totally.
And I guess my final question to you, Verily, would be for someone who's sitting at home, who maybe they get up one day and they're inspired, and the next day they get up and they're feeling flat, and that they're trying to find that sort of passion and purpose, that interest in life again. For someone who's maybe younger or older, who's sitting at home and wanting to look for that passion and that lust for life again, what would be some of the wisdom or guidance, or what could you impart on them, to help them every day?
Be grateful that you're here. That's the first thing. Every time that you take a breath in and a breath out, be grateful that you're doing that without thinking. And I know how hard I had to think and work for every breath in and every breath out. Breathing was not a one-part process for me. It was a two-part process. And so I think that gratitude for our life that we're given, and gratitude for the opportunity that we have got control over how we react to whatever happens in our lives. So if we wake up one day and we're not feeling it, we're feeling flat, we're feeling down, have some backup goals. So I'm a real goals person. Yeah. And goals is what got me through. It was being flexible about those goals. And so I had goals that were short term, which was in the next 5 minutes, I'm going to achieve this. So to change something about my state to help myself. And that could be as simple as I'm going to get up out of bed, or I'm going to sit up in bed if I can't get up out of bed, or I'm going to seek something that will help me to either feel more calm, to inspire me. So that could be listening to an audiobook. These days, I listen to a lot of podcasts. It could be calling a friend or family member, connecting. Connection is so important.
Yes.
So having goals that are flexible is really, really important, and having backup goals for those days that normally you'd be able to achieve your goals and you just don't feel like you can on those days. Have backup goals. Have those fail-safe ones that you can still achieve something in that day. Because when we're really down, for me, that's in my experience what made the difference. Knowing that I was going to achieve something every day. So I often ask people, what did you ask yourself when you woke up this morning? If you've never thought about that question, I challenge you to think what it is tomorrow when you wake up after hearing this conversation. What is it that's the first thing that pops into your head? And for me, it is, what am I going to achieve today? Every single day that I wake up, it's what am I going to achieve today?
Yes.
And on the days where I couldn't get out of bed, and I still have them, there are
mm,
still days that if I get the flu or if I've got something going on and I'm struggling, I'm going to stay in bed because I can't physically deal with overwhelming my body trying to get up and do things.
mm,
And so I still have those days. What am I going to achieve today? Hmm. I'm going to find a new podcast, or I'm going to continue listening to one, or I'm going to search YouTube for something that will help me feel better, or even I'm going to find a new show on Netflix, whatever it might be.
yeah.
Be a seeker and someone who can achieve something no matter what state you're in. Even
Mm,
when I was in hospital beds
mm, mm,
and I was hooked up to machine after machine and I couldn't even lift my little finger that far, my goal was to keep breathing. I
mm,
still set a goal and something to achieve.
mm,
And so, no matter how small or how massive that is, because for me, that one small goal of let's breathe in and now let's breathe out is a small goal. And yet the consequence was massive. That was my life
mm.
that I was saving.
Exactly.
So, yep, it's about not underestimating the power of
Yes.
goal setting and
And what
being a
that goal is.
seeker and what the goal is.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
right. It's like adversity. So often people come to me and say, but, yeah, I've gone through adversity, but it's nothing like yours, or it's nothing like this guest that came on and shared what they went through. And what I always say to that, it doesn't matter what your adversity is, even the same adversity for you at different times in your life, you will respond to differently because of
Mm,
everything that's going on. Adversity is recognizing and acknowledging that you're going through something difficult. So
mm.
give yourself that space to work through that and honor that and honor
Yeah.
yourself wherever you are in your process.
Love that. And I think one thing I add is just understanding. And I think for what I've noticed in my own life and interacting with other people is that someone can prick their finger and they can cry and it can be overwhelming. And then I mean I know for me like a daily goal that I had was literally lifting my body up every morning, and then after 6 weeks, then it was going slowly for a swim in the ocean, and the waves would rock me, and I would be in extreme pain.
Yeah.
I just remember feeling the pain and not wanting painkillers, and that balancing act. But watching someone else prick their finger and them crying and not judging and not going, you know,
Mm.
like, well, excuse me, did you have this cut open? Did you have bone? Did you have all this sort of, that's not helpful at all, and it
Yeah.
doesn't matter. It's not a score rating system, and I might have a cut to my hand, and someone else might have the exact same cut, but they might feel more pain. They
Hmm.
could be more in tune with their emotions or whatever it may be, and that's okay. It's okay to not count those sorts of things, and not count someone out. I
Yeah.
think that's very important for and for the Decide Your Destiny community, for everyone going forward. I think not counting people out and counting their experiences out, and counting their journey out, because we
Yeah.
all have a story to tell, and we
We
all
do.
we all have a voice to share, like you said.
We do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so
Wow.
much, Kyle. This has been wonderful.
Thank you, Verily. It's been very, very in tune, on a different layer,
Mm.
I think, which is really great. And I really do hope people that have been watching have taken a lot of things away from it. I mean, you have an incredible, incredible story, and it's incredible that you've aligned that up with helping people and helping as much as you can, and also acknowledging that there is that balance of help and and also helping myself, because I think there's a lot of lovely people out there in the world that really give themselves, but they give all of themselves. And what happens then is you've got no more reserves. You've got no
Hmm.
more reserves for your family, for your own loved ones, and you can't really give as much as your potential could be. Take it
Yeah.
day by day. I think you just keep doing what you're doing, and I'm looking forward to seeing season two. And
Hmm.
if there's and please allow us time for sharing anything with my community. I mean, I know you're bringing out season two, but anything else, please let them know where they can go and check you out and learn a little bit more about your story.
Yeah, for sure. We actually have a lot of stuff in the works at the moment. So our website's getting built soon. There'll
Awesome.
be all sorts of different things that people can go to there in season two. And you will be part of my season two because I'm interviewing you in a week or two,
Yes.
which I'm really
Exciting.
looking forward to. Yeah. Each of my guests gets asked three questions, actually four questions, but three questions about themselves. And in season one, we didn't always put those questions in the podcast. This time, those questions are going in the podcast. They're a beautiful way for the listener to connect to each of my guests before we get into their why me moment. And one of those questions is to discuss a book that's impacted their life. So we're creating a book list so that people can go to the website and have a
Love it.
look at all those different books with links to Amazon if they want to go and purchase them. So we're creating things like that in the background.
Yes.
We're creating a community where people can, respond to the episodes and discuss them and, be a little more interactive. I'm also doing some tips and tricks, which I didn't do in season one, which is really a little bit of what we've done today, giving some advice. If you're in this sort of a situation where you're feeling like this, here's a tip, here's something that you can do to help yourself this week. So there'll be a little bit of that as well. And I have just so many amazing guests coming on with a much wider range, actually, of experiences, which is going to be interesting, to use that word that you used earlier.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, and so I'm actually really, really excited. And I think, again, I'm on a journey along with my guests. And so the more that we get through each of these seasons, the more we're learning, the more we're refining, and the more we're getting feedback from our listeners as to what they're wanting more of. And so we're listening. And yeah, we'll start reading some of the reviews that people leave on the podcast as well.
Yep.
So that, yeah, it's honoring everybody's interaction that they have. And
Yes.
so eventually the email, not email, eventually the website address will be whymemovement.com.
Beautiful.
But it's not up and working just yet. We'll be a couple of weeks off that.
Hmm.
And yeah, my artwork is another part of that. Because there is so much behind the artwork, a lot of people see my work and they instantly feel a lot of the emotion behind the work. And so they're quite often drawn to pieces quite significantly. So we're setting up a store for people to purchase copies of the artwork as well, so they can take a
Beautiful.
little piece of that home. But in the meantime, people can contact me at Vera Lee Original on social media. So Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn are my three preferences.
Beautiful. Great. Awesome.
Yeah.
Guys, go check her out. Check out her podcast. If you want an inspiring story for the day, for the week, for the month, definitely check out her podcast. And yes, like we said, I look forward to being on season 2. And everyone, thank you for joining Vera Lee and myself. I hope you took a lot away. And as always, guys, remember, decide your destiny. Cheers.